Human shielded an alien girl from the cold river wind. She repaid him with a memory he needed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The wind howled across the barren landscape as Jake Thompson trudged through the icy forest, his breath visible in the frigid air. The temperature had dropped sharply overnight, and he knew he had to get back to the shelter before nightfall. A park ranger by trade, Jake was used to these harsh conditions, but even he could feel the biting cold cutting through his layers of clothing. As he rounded a bend near the frozen river, something caught his eye. It was a flash of blue, stark against the snow-covered ground. Curious, he approached cautiously, his boots crunching over the thick layer of frost. There, lying in a heap at the edge of the river, was a young alien girl. Her skin was a pale shade of turquoise, her long hair shimmering silver in the dim light. She was shivering uncontrollably, her thin clothing offering little protection against the freezing temperatures. Jake's instincts kicked in immediately. Without thinking, he dropped to his knees beside her. The girl's eyes fluttered open, revealing bright violet irises that stared up at him in confusion and fear. She attempted to push herself up, but her body was too weak. Jake quickly shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shivering form. "Hey, you're all right now," he said softly, trying to reassure her. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl's lips parted, but no sound came out, only a weak rasp. Jake felt a surge of concern. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, guiding her to sit up. Her skin was ice-cold to the touch. He needed to get her out of the wind and into warmth, fast. "You're safe now," he repeated, his voice steady. He had no idea who or what she was, but in that moment, all that mattered was getting her to safety. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms, trying to be as gentle as possible. The girl barely seemed to notice, too exhausted to resist. As Jake carried her toward the shelter, he could feel the weight of her body against his chest, and though he knew nothing about her, he felt an overwhelming need to protect her. The wind continued to howl, and the forest around him seemed eerily quiet. The journey back to the small cabin would take at least an hour, and the cold was beginning to seep through his own clothing. But Jake didn't mind. He would carry her as long as he had to. He could only hope she would survive the night. When they finally reached the cabin, Jake rushed inside, relieved to find a fire still burning in the hearth. He laid her down on the couch, grabbing a blanket to cover her and keep her warm. The girl's eyes were closed now, and for a moment, Jake thought she might fall asleep. He stood over her for a moment, unsure what to do next. Just then, the girl's eyes fluttered open again, and she gazed up at him. A faint smile crossed her lips, and then, in a soft voice, she whispered, "Thank you." Jake wasn't sure what to make of her words. It was a simple thank you, but there was something in the way she said it that made it feel far more meaningful. As he sat down across from her, the fire crackling in the background, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of connection to this stranger. He wasn't sure why, but it felt like she was important in some way, as though this moment was more than just a random act of kindness. Little did he know, the girl's thank you was only the beginning of a bond that would change both of their lives forever. As the fire crackled and the warmth began to spread through the cabin, Jake Thompson found himself watching the alien girl, who was now wrapped in a blanket on the couch. Her turquoise skin shimmered faintly in the light of the fire, and her silver hair seemed to glow with an otherworldly sheen. She had fallen into a deep sleep, but the faint rise and fall of her chest told Jake that she was alive. Barely, but alive. He sat in the armchair nearby, unsure of what to do next. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why had she ended up out in the freezing wilderness, barely hanging on to life? It was then that he noticed something strange, something he had missed earlier in his haste to get her to safety. The girl's eyes flickered open, and she met his gaze for the first time since he had found her. There was a softness in her expression, a gratitude that seemed to go beyond words. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but it was clear. The sincerity in her words struck Jake harder than he expected. He nodded, still unsure of how to respond. I didn't know what else to do. You were freezing out there. She nodded slightly, her gaze softening. Then, she did something Jake hadn't anticipated. Slowly, she raised a hand and placed it gently on her chest. A faint glow pulsed from her fingers, and Jake could feel the temperature in the room subtly change, as if the warmth of the fire was somehow magnified. I will repay you, she said quietly, her voice shaky but filled with determination. Jake's brows furrowed in confusion. Repay me? You don't owe me anything. He stopped mid-sentence as the girl's eyes closed again, her hand still pressed against her chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as though in response to some invisible cue, the air around them seemed to shimmer. Jake blinked, unsure if he was imagining it, but when he looked back at the girl, she was no longer lying in the blanket. Instead, she was standing before him, her figure now glowing with a soft, ethereal light. She wasn't moving, but the light that surrounded her seemed to pulse in rhythm with her breath. What's happening? Jake muttered under his breath, rising from his chair. The girl's gaze locked with his, and there was a strange intensity in her eyes, as if she were seeing straight through him. Her voice, when it came, was steady and filled with a quiet power. I am giving you a memory, she said. A memory that will help you find the answers you seek. The truth you have lost. Jake froze. His heart skipped a beat. A memory? What do you mean? But before he could ask more, the room grew silent again. The glow around her began to fade, and the girl collapsed back onto the couch, her energy spent. Jake rushed to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. Her breathing was shallow, but she was still alive. He looked down at her, confused and bewildered by what had just happened. Was this some kind of alien ability? And why did she say she was giving him a memory? He didn't know, but something told him this encounter was far from over. As the night wore on, Jake sat by the fire, unable to shake the feeling that his life had just been irrevocably changed. Whatever the girl had shared with him, whatever memory she had given him, was more than just a gift. It was a clue, a key to something bigger. He didn't know what, but he was determined to find out. And as he glanced at her sleeping form, he couldn't help but wonder what role she would play in the mystery unfolding before him. The next few days were a blur for Jake Thompson. He spent every waking moment trying to make sense of what had happened, what the girl, Zara, had given him. The memory, whatever it was, lingered in his mind like a fog he couldn't shake off. He could feel it pressing against the edges of his consciousness, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't quite grasp it. Zara had been sleeping most of the time, her energy drained from whatever strange act she had performed. She hadn't spoken much, but when she did, it was only to thank him again for saving her life. Jake wasn't sure what to make of her, but he knew one thing for certain. He needed answers. The memory she had shared with him felt important, like a key to unlocking something that had been hidden from him for years. But what? That was the question that kept him up at night. He had no clue. As Zara rested, Jake began to scour the small cabin for anything that might help him understand more about her and the mysterious memory she had given him. He found nothing. No clues, no hints. Just a sense of unease that seemed to settle over him the longer she remained unconscious. He tried to distract himself by checking the weather outside. The snow had stopped falling, and the wind had died down, but the temperature was still bitterly cold. He would need to restock supplies soon if he intended to stay out here much longer. It wasn't safe to remain in the wilderness for too long. It was then that Zara woke up, her eyes fluttering open. She seemed disoriented at first, but then her gaze focused on Jake. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean to fall asleep for so long. Jake smiled softly, trying to hide the worry he felt. It's all right. You've been through a lot. Just take it easy for now. Zara nodded, but looked as though she wanted to say something more. Instead, she simply gave a small, weak smile. For a moment, Jake thought she might fall back to sleep, but then she surprised him. I told you I would repay you, she said, her voice growing stronger. And I will. Jake blinked, confused. You don't have to do anything. I'm just glad you're all right. Zara shook her head slowly. No, I have something for you. A memory. A piece of something that you need to see. I've given you a part of my past, but there's more. You need to understand. Jake's heart raced as she spoke. A piece of her past? What could that possibly mean? And why had she said he needed to understand? His mind swirled with questions, but before he could ask any of them, Zara reached out and touched his hand. The touch was soft, but it sent a strange shiver down his spine. He felt a pull, an almost magnetic force, as though something inside him was stirring. "Let me show you," she said, her voice calm but filled with a sense of purpose. Before Jake could respond, the room around them seemed to blur, as though the very air was shifting. The firelight flickered strangely, casting odd shadows on the walls. Zara's eyes glowed briefly, and then, in the span of a heartbeat, everything changed. Jake's mind was flooded with visions, flashes of images that didn't belong to him. He saw things he didn't recognize, a distant world with towering structures and strange, alien landscapes. He saw Zara. No, a version of her, standing in a place of power, surrounded by others who looked like her. There were voices, too, but they were unintelligible, drowned out by the rush of sensations. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the vision was gone. Jake blinked, disoriented, his head spinning. He looked around, trying to get his bearings, but everything seemed the same. Zara was still sitting across from him, her hand still resting lightly on his. "What was that?" Jake asked, his voice trembling with both awe and fear. Zara's expression was solemn. "That was only a small part of what you need to see. There is more, but you must be ready for it. The truth about who I am, and who you are, will change everything." Jake's heart raced. "I don't understand." Zara gave a soft sigh. "I know you don't, but you will. You have to." For the first time, Jake saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. Fear of what? He couldn't say, but he knew one thing. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than both of them. The silence in the room stretched between them as Jake tried to process what had just happened. His mind still buzzed with the images from the vision Zara had shared with him. The alien landscapes, the strange figures, and the overwhelming sense of power. It was all too much. But there was one thing that stood out, something he couldn't ignore. Zara's fear. The fear that had flashed in her eyes. A fear that seemed to tie everything together. She wasn't just some helpless alien. No, she was something more. Something he needed to understand. What was that? Jake asked again, his voice low and hesitant. Zara remained still, her gaze focused on him, but there was a deep sadness in her eyes. "It's the truth you need to see. The truth about who I am, and who you are," she replied softly, her voice carrying a weight Jake hadn't expected. He shook his head, trying to make sense of her words. "I don't understand. You keep saying that, but..." He stopped, not knowing how to finish the thought. "What truth? What do you mean?" Zara sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I wish I could explain everything to you all at once. But you're not ready. You need to see more, understand more." She paused, as if weighing her next words carefully. "What I showed you is only the beginning. There's more to come, but you have to be ready for it. Ready to face the truth about me, about what's happening to us." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What's happening to us?" Zara's gaze flickered, as if she was unsure how to answer. "There's something inside me," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "A memory, yes, but also a part of me that's different. It's not just my past. It's connected to the future. Our future, and the reason you're here." Jake took a step forward, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, our future? What does this have to do with me?" Zara hesitated for a moment before she spoke again, her voice tinged with urgency. "You are more than just a human. You've been chosen, just like I have. There's a purpose for you, and for me. But the truth about that, it's hidden. In the memories. In the things I've seen. Things I can't explain." She looked away, her expression distant, lost in thought. Jake felt a surge of frustration. "You keep talking in riddles. Just tell me what's going on." Zara turned her eyes back to him, a deep sadness in her gaze. "I wish I could. But some things can't be told. They have to be experienced." She paused, her breath shaky. "The memory I gave you, it's a key. But it's not enough. There's more that's missing. I need you to trust me. You need to remember what you've seen, and then, only then, will you understand." Jake stood there, his mind racing. He didn't know what she was talking about, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just some random encounter. Whatever had brought them together, it was no accident. They were connected, in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Zara's voice broke through his thoughts. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice strained. "They're coming. The ones who will stop us. We need to be ready." Jake frowned. "Who's coming?" Who's trying to stop us? But Zara didn't answer. She merely closed her eyes, as if gathering her strength. Jake's heart raced. He didn't know who they were, but the urgency in Zara's voice was unmistakable. He had to find the answers, and he had to find them fast. Whatever was coming, it was clear it was going to change everything, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for that. But he had no choice. The truth was waiting, and he was going to uncover it, no matter what it took. The night had fallen thick, the darkness settling in around the cabin as Jake sat by the dim firelight, his mind still racing from the conversation with Zara. Her words echoed in his head, and despite his best efforts to push them aside, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, a park ranger, someone who spent his days walking through forests and keeping watch over the wildlife. But now, it seemed that the ordinary was slipping away. Zara was more than just an alien. She was a part of something much bigger, something he wasn't yet fully able to understand. The memory she had given him. It was a key, she had said. A key to something hidden. But what? What did it unlock? The question gnawed at him, making his chest tighten. He glanced over at Zara, who was lying on the couch, her eyes closed as though she were deep in thought or sleep. There was an aura of mystery about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. She was still recovering, her body weakened from the cold, but there was a strength in her presence that he couldn't ignore. As the fire crackled and the cabin settled into a quiet rhythm, Jake leaned back in his chair, his thoughts drifting to the strange images he had seen. They weren't just visions, they felt real. The alien landscapes, the towering structures, the figures that had loomed in the background. They were part of something bigger, something that had to do with Zara's past. And then there was the memory. He had felt it, inside of him, like a whisper at the edge of his mind. It wasn't clear yet, but Jake knew he had to find a way to remember more. It wasn't just a curiosity anymore, it was a necessity. He needed to know what it all meant. What was Zara hiding? What was her connection to him? And why had she chosen him to be a part of it all? He stood up from his chair, his body stiff from sitting too long. The wind howled outside, a reminder that the world beyond the cabin was still as unforgiving as ever. But inside, there was a quiet, a stillness that Jake found oddly comforting despite the weight of the questions that hung in the air. As he walked toward the small kitchen area to grab some water, he noticed Zara stir. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, their gazes locked. There was something in her eyes, a deep sadness, maybe fear or regret. It was fleeting, but it was enough to make Jake's heart skip a beat. She wasn't just the alien girl he had saved. She was something more, something that carried a burden he didn't yet understand. "Are you all right?" Jake asked, his voice soft, but full of concern. Zara nodded slowly, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice carried a certain weariness. She paused for a moment, as if debating whether or not to continue. "Jake," she said, her voice low and urgent, "there's something I need to tell you." Jake's heart raced. He moved closer, sitting down on the edge of the chair near her. "What is it? What's going on?" Zara's eyes flickered as though she was gathering her thoughts. "The truth I've shown you, the memories, they're not just mine," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "They're connected to your past, to your family." Jake's breath caught in his chest. "My family," he repeated, his mind reeling. "What do you mean? What does this have to do with me?" Zara closed her eyes for a moment, as if she were searching for the right words. "Your family," she began slowly, "was involved in something I cannot fully explain. But you need to know, Jake. You are part of this. Whether you understand it or not, you are a key player in what's to come." Jake felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had always thought of his family as simple folk, people who lived their lives quietly in the countryside. But now, Zara was telling him there was something deeper, something connected to him that he hadn't even known about. And whatever it was bigger than both of them. "I don't understand," Jake whispered, his voice filled with confusion and a rising sense of dread. Zara reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it on his. "I know you don't. But you will," she said softly. "You will." The next few days felt like a blur to Jake as he tried to absorb the weight of Zara's words. Her revelation, that his family was somehow tied to her past, to the strange memories she had shared with him, left him in a constant state of confusion. Every time he thought he had a grip on it, the answers slipped further away. He couldn't stop thinking about what she had said, the truth about his family, the purpose she believed he served. He kept replaying her words in his mind, hoping to find something he had missed, some clue to tie it all together. Meanwhile, Zara remained quiet, her health improving slowly, but the emotional toll seemed to weigh heavily on her. She still wasn't saying much, and every time Jake tried to press her for more details, she would just shake her head, her eyes distant, as if she were carrying the burden of something much larger than herself. It was early one evening when Zara finally spoke again, her voice breaking the silence that had settled between them. "Jake, I need you to trust me," she said, her tone soft but urgent. "I can only guide you so far, but you will have to find the rest on your own." Jake looked at her, his heart heavy with the unanswered questions. "What do you mean, find the rest? What am I supposed to do?" She turned her gaze toward the window, where the last light of the day was fading behind the snow-covered trees. "There are things hidden in the past, Jake. Things that need to be uncovered. You have a connection to them. A connection to me. But I can't give you everything. Not yet." Jake stood up, feeling a surge of frustration. "This is madness. I don't know what's real anymore. I've spent my whole life thinking I was just an ordinary guy, and now you're telling me that I'm part of something bigger than I could possibly imagine." Zara's eyes flickered with something. Regret, maybe, or guilt. "You're not just ordinary. And neither am I. You are connected to something ancient, Jake. A legacy that's been forgotten. And your family, your ancestors, they played a role in it." Jake's mind spun as he processed her words. His family? His ancestors? He had never once considered that they were anything other than simple folk who had lived and worked in small towns. There was no way they could be involved in something so grand. Zara seemed to read his thoughts. "I know this is hard to believe, but it's true. The memory I shared with you, it's only part of what's coming. There's a reason you're here, and there's a reason you've been chosen." Jake's heart raced. He didn't know what she meant by chosen, but he knew one thing. He had to find out. "What do I have to do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the confusion still swirling inside him. Zara took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter, more intense. "You need to go to the place where it all began. There, you'll find the answers. But it won't be easy. You'll face trials, challenges that will test everything you know about yourself." Jake stared at her, his mind reeling. "Where is this place? What am I supposed to find there?" Zara's gaze softened as she spoke. "It's a place that's been hidden for centuries. Lost to most, but not to you. You'll recognize it when you see it. And once you do, everything will fall into place. But first, you need to believe that you are part of this. That you are more than just a man in the woods." Jake swallowed hard. He had no idea what Zara meant by all of this, but the way she spoke, the urgency in her voice, it felt like this was something he couldn't ignore. "I don't know if I can believe in all this," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Zara gave him a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to believe it all, Jake. Just believe that you are ready. Ready to find the truth, no matter what it costs." The weight of her words settled over him like a thick blanket. He didn't know what to expect or where this journey would take him, but one thing was clear. He was no longer the man he had been. And whatever was coming, it was going to change everything. Zara turned her gaze back to the window, her face serene, as if she had already accepted whatever was about to happen. "The truth is waiting for you," she said softly, "and it's time for you to go find it." Jake stood in the doorway of the cabin, staring out into the snow-covered landscape. The wind howled outside, but it was nothing compared to the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. Zara's words echoed in his ears. "You need to go to the place where it all began." What did she mean by that? What was this place, and how could he find it? For the first time in his life, Jake felt like he was standing on the edge of something far bigger than himself, and he had no idea how deep it went. He turned back to look at Zara, who was sitting by the fire, her eyes closed in quiet contemplation. She had given him so much, but there was still so much left unsaid. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the truth, but deep down, he knew that it was something he couldn't avoid. He had no choice but to follow through. He needed to find the place, whatever it was, and uncover the secrets buried within it. With a deep breath, Jake made up his mind. He would leave at first light. He wouldn't go alone, though. Zara had already shown him that she was more than just a helpless alien. She was part of this mystery, and if there was any chance of finding the answers, he knew he would need her with him. The next morning, Jake packed up what little gear he had, including a few supplies to keep them warm during the journey. Zara had insisted that they move quickly. That time was of the essence. And though Jake still didn't fully understand why, he trusted her. They set out together, moving through the forest at a steady pace. The cold was biting, and the snow underfoot crunched loudly with each step they took. The path was unfamiliar to Jake, but Zara seemed to know exactly where they were going, her steps sure and purposeful. As they walked, Jake couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in Zara's demeanor. There was a quiet determination in her, a strength he hadn't seen before. She was more than just the fragile girl he had first rescued from the river. She was a part of something bigger, and he was starting to realize just how important this journey was, not just for her, but for him as well. Hours passed, and the terrain became more rugged, the snow deeper, the trees thicker. Jake's muscles ached from the exertion, but he kept pushing forward, following Zara's lead. They stopped for a brief rest when the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow. Zara sat down on a nearby rock, looking out over the landscape. "We're getting closer," she said quietly. Jake sat down beside her, watching the way her eyes seemed to scan the horizon, as though she were waiting for something to appear. "How do you know?" he asked, still struggling to understand how she could be so certain. Zara looked at him, her violet eyes shining with an intensity that made Jake's heart race. "I can feel it," she said softly. "It's calling to me." Jake didn't fully understand what she meant by that, but there was no mistaking the look in her eyes. She was sure of what she was doing, even if he wasn't. As they continued on, the forest began to thin, and the landscape began to change. The trees gave way to rocky hills, and the snow-covered ground became more uneven. Zara's pace quickened, and Jake found himself struggling to keep up. Finally, as dusk began to fall, they arrived at their destination. It was a small clearing, surrounded by towering cliffs. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone structure, partially buried in the snow. It looked ancient, its surface weathered by time, but there was something undeniably powerful about it. Zara stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide with awe. "This is it," she whispered. Jake stood beside her, feeling a sense of awe of his own. He had no idea what they had stumbled upon, but there was no denying the significance of the place. Zara turned to him, her face serious. "This is where it all began, Jake. The truth is inside. We just need to find it." Jake nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what they would find inside the stone structure, but one thing was clear. Whatever it was, it would change everything. The stone structure loomed before them, its ancient form partially buried beneath a blanket of snow. As Zara and Jake stood there, a mix of awe and uncertainty filled the air between them. Jake could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had come all this way, but now that they had arrived, he couldn't help but wonder if he was truly ready for whatever lay inside. Zara took a step forward, her eyes scanning the structure with a focus that sent a chill down Jake's spine. "This is it," she said, her voice low but filled with certainty. "Everything starts here." Jake followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. As they approached the entrance, a feeling of anticipation washed over him. The air felt thick, as if the very ground they were standing on was alive with history, waiting to be unlocked. "How do we get in?" Jake asked, glancing around the entrance, which was covered in a layer of ice and snow. Zara knelt down and placed her hand on the stone surface, her fingers glowing faintly with a soft light. Jake watched, fascinated, as the stone seemed to react to her touch. Slowly, the ice covering the door began to shift, moving aside as though the structure itself was awakening. With a low rumble, the stone door creaked open, revealing a dark passage leading deeper into the heart of the structure. Jake hesitated for a moment, unsure if he was ready to step into the unknown. But Zara's steady presence beside him gave him the courage he needed. "It's time," she whispered. Without another word, they stepped into the darkness. The air inside was cool and musty, a stark contrast to the cold, crisp air outside. As their footsteps echoed through the chamber, Jake felt a strange sense of being watched, as if the walls themselves were alive with stories that had been waiting for centuries to be told. Zara moved ahead with purpose, her steps sure and steady. Jake followed closely behind, trying to keep up with her pace. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, but eventually, they arrived at a large, open chamber. The walls of the chamber were covered in intricate carvings and symbols, some of which Jake recognized from the vision Zara had shown him. It was a language he didn't understand, but somehow, he knew it was important. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it rested an object that seemed to glow with an inner light. It was a small, crystalline orb, its surface shimmering as though it were alive with energy. Zara stepped forward and reached out to touch the orb. As her fingers made contact, a wave of energy rippled through the room, and Jake felt a jolt of electricity run through his body. The orb pulsed with light, and suddenly, images began to flood Jake's mind. He saw flashes of a time long past, ancient civilizations, great battles, and powerful beings whose faces were shrouded in mystery. He saw Zara, not as the girl he had met, but as a figure of immense power, standing at the heart of a kingdom that spanned worlds. The memories came fast and furious, each one more vivid than the last. But amid the chaos of images, one face stood out, a man whose features were familiar, yet unfamiliar at the same time. Jake's heart skipped a beat. The man was him. He didn't know how, but he knew it was him. And in that moment, it all clicked. The truth that had eluded him for so long was suddenly clear. He wasn't just a random park ranger. He was connected to something far greater, something that had been hidden for generations. And Zara was the key to unlocking it all. As the vision faded, Jake stumbled back, his mind reeling with the weight of what he had seen. Zara was standing beside him now, her eyes filled with understanding. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked softly. Jake nodded, his breath shaky. "I don't understand. What does it all mean?" Zara's gaze softened, and for the first time, Jake saw the full weight of the burden she carried. "It means you are part of this," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Part of something that goes beyond time and space. And now, it's up to you to decide what happens next." The chamber around them seemed to pulse with energy as Jake stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The vision had come so quickly, so overwhelming, that it left him reeling. He knew now that his life had been a lie, or at least, the life he thought he knew. The truth, the deep-rooted connection between him and Zara, had been right in front of him the whole time. He wasn't just a park ranger from Earth. He was part of something much bigger, something ancient. As the last of the images faded from his mind, Jake took a shaky breath and turned to Zara. She stood still, watching him, her face a mixture of patience and sadness. She knew this was coming, but she had given him the space to discover it on his own. She had always known who he was. "What now?" Jake asked, his voice hoarse. "What am I supposed to do with all of this?" Zara didn't answer immediately. She walked to the pedestal where the orb had been resting and placed her hand back on the smooth surface, as if grounding herself. "Now, Jake, you make your choice." Jake frowned, stepping closer to her. "What do you mean? I don't know what I'm supposed to choose." Zara looked at him, her violet eyes steady and serious. "You have a decision to make. The truth is here, but you can't just accept it. You have to decide how to use it. You can go back to your old life, forget everything, and leave this all behind. Or you can step forward, embrace who you are, and fulfill the purpose that's been set for you." Jake shook his head, his mind still spinning. "I didn't ask for this. I'm just a guy who helps people in the woods. What do you mean, embrace who I am? I'm not special. I don't even know what's going on." Zara took a deep breath, stepping closer to him. "You've always been special, Jake. You just didn't know it. You've been chosen, and not just by me. This path was set for you long before you ever crossed paths with me. The memories I shared with you, they weren't just a gift. They were a calling. And now it's up to you to decide how to answer that call." Jake's chest tightened as he processed her words. He was chosen? By whom? And what was the path she was talking about? He didn't feel special. He didn't feel like some hero from an ancient prophecy. He was just Jake. But the look in Zara's eyes, the way she spoke with such certainty, it made him question everything. "How do I know if I'm ready for this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do I know if I can do what you're asking?" Zara's expression softened, and she reached out to gently place her hand on his arm. "You don't have to know, Jake. You just have to trust yourself. Trust that you're capable of more than you realize." Jake looked at her, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He still didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing. He couldn't turn back now. He had seen too much, learned too much. There was no going back to his old life. Not now. What happens if I choose to step forward? He asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty still swirling in his mind. Zara smiled, though it was bittersweet. If you choose to step forward, you'll find the truth. And with that truth, you'll understand your place in all of this. But be warned, Jake, there will be consequences. The journey ahead will not be easy. There will be challenges. But you won't be alone. You'll have me. Jake took a deep breath, feeling a sense of resolve settle in his chest. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he couldn't turn away from it. He had to see this through. He had to find out who he truly was and why Zara had come into his life. I'm ready, he said, his voice firm. Zara nodded, her eyes filled with both pride and something deeper, something Jake couldn't quite place. Then let's go, she said, turning toward the dark corridor behind them. The next part of our journey begins now.